Hi, human geographers. We are discussing topic 1.5 called human environmental interaction. This is another concept very much like spatial analysis. We are going to continue to talk about and utilize as a framework for understanding all of the other topics to come in this course. And so your objective is actually the same as the previous video. You need to explain how major geographic concepts illustrate spatial relationships. And so this video, we're going to be focusing on theories regarding interaction between humans and the environment. And so the study of how humans interact with or adapt to their environment is called cultural ecology. And when we're thinking about these concepts that we're going to discuss today, you need to understand that they have changed over time, right? Cultural ecology is a very old area of study, and so theories that cultural ecologists started with have kind of evolved and changed over time as humans have evolved and changed over time, and technology has increased. And so we're going to talk about two theories specifically that are kind of in opposition of one another. And these are environmental determinism and possibilism. And so environmental determinism is like an 18th century theory. It's pretty old, right? And it's the idea that climate and landforms, we've talked about elevation, precipitation, all of these, physical features of the environment. It's the belief that those are the most powerful forces that shape human behavior and ultimately lead to societal or cultural development. So basically, the natural environment is the only thing that matters. And this is, when we talk about possibilism, which is the next theory, you'll kind of understand a little bit more. But this is not 100% accurate. And it was actually used by these kind of cultural ecologists and used in mainstream society to justify a little bit of racism. So during the period of colonization throughout our world, right, which was really at its head in the 17th century, we have European countries that are basically spreading all over the world and taking over colonies in places like Africa, the Southwest Asia, as well as Southeast and South Asia. Okay, so we've got a lot of explorers that are also traveling or had traveled from Europe to what we call the New World as well, and have created colonies in North America and South America. Okay, so really simplify, we've got European powers that are taking over basically wherever they can all over the world. And the idea is that cultural ecologists are spreading in the 18th century is that these warmer climates, which you can see on this climate map, remember, if it's close to the equator, then it's going to have a more tropical, humid, hot environment, right? These warmer climates cause people to live there, to be relaxed and lazy, and they almost went as far as saying uneducated or unintelligent. And so it was the cultural ecologists saying environmental determinism is the only factor that matters. They're arguing that these Europeans are able or are justified or should be taking over these areas kind of in the southern hemisphere because the people there are, lazy or relaxed or not developed. And this just isn't the case. So these Europeans were believing, that they were more motivated, they were more intelligent, they were more advanced than people living in these warmer climates. and they use that to justify basically taking over these people's land. And so we know, through historical evidence that that's not the case at all. The reason why the Europeans were able to do all of that is because they had guns, right? That's really, if you are familiar with Guns, Germs, and Steel, by Jared Diamond, who is a very famous geographer. He basically says, these Europeans were able to take over, basically almost the whole entire world, because they had steel that they crafted into weapons, and used that to really make their way across the world and conquer these areas, that are warmer climates. It's not because the people are relaxed or have bad attitudes or are unintelligent. Here's another example of environmental determinism. Okay, and this is going to be a more legitimate example. Environmental determinism says, physical conditions, the physical landscape is the most important thing. It's the only thing that really influences human development. Well, if we look at this map of desertification, and I'm sure that you can understand that that means that these areas are places around the world that are turning to desert, right? And so you can see we have hyper-arid areas, semi-arid, and then dry subhuman. And the idea here is that climate and precipitation are determining, they are controlling what's going to happen in these areas, right? Excuse me. There is not going to be suitable arable land for farming in the Sahara Desert. It's just not going to happen, right? There's no way that we can irrigate, right, or create enough precipitation or bring enough water into the Sahara Desert to create arable land. It's just not going to happen, right? This is an example of how the environment, the climate and precipitation is determining, it's controlling, it is the main thing that is deciding what kind of activities are going to happen in this area. Now, let's talk about the opposite theory, which is more in favor with geographers and cultural ecologists today. This is called possibilism. So much more modern, much more nuanced, and it takes into account the fact that, yes, there are limitations imposed by the natural environment on humans. However, humans are innovators. They are able to modify and respond to the environment, use technology and those innovations to really control the environment more than let the environment control them. And so instead of having the environment determine our culture and development, possibilism says that humans can use their cultural innovations to modify the environment for their needs, for human needs. Here are some examples of possibilism. These islands are so cool. These are called the Palm Islands, and they were constructed out of the ground, right, out of the sea. You can see with 53 million pounds of sand and 12 million pounds of rocks, right? These are artificial islands. They are not naturally occurring. A construction company built these. And you can see these are located in Dubai, United Arab Emirates, and it only took 4 years to build these. It's so interesting, right? Humans have the ability to innovate and to create and use technology to modify the environment for our needs. The Hoover Dam is another example. So the Hoover Dam was constructed in 1936 during the Great Depression, and the idea behind the Hoover Dam was that they would be able to harness the water power to supply electricity to some basically desert regions in Nevada and Arizona and New Mexico. And so, not only does the Hoover Dam supply power, but it also helps control the water supply coming from the Colorado River, and it allows, like I said, these states surrounding Nevada access to fresh and clean water as well, which is typically not available in a desert region, right? So Las Vegas actually would have never happened. It wouldn't have been able to sustain a population as large as it does now without the Hoover Dam, because it needed water and power supplies, which this human innovation, this invention, um, allowed. And then, kind of, my last example is one of the oldest examples of possibilism that I can really think of. This kind of environment right here on the hillside, these kind of steps, they're called terraces. And again, we'll come back to this when we talk through agriculture. But terraces are invented, or were invented by the Inca people living in the South American mountains. Um, and so basically, mountains are not ideal to grow crops on, right? Because of their elevation, their soil type, etc. And so these terraces, or these steps that are dug into the side of these mountains, allow cultivation of crops, whereas before it wouldn't have been possible. And so, this human innovation, right, to dig these terraces and to cultivate crops on the sides of mountains is an example of possibilism, right? So the natural environment, elevation and landforms, right, did not inhibit the people in South America from coming up with a way to cultivate their crops, right? So, these are the kind of major spatial concepts when we consider, or I'm sorry, major geographic concepts when we consider the interactions between humans and their environment. Is it possibilism or environmental determinism? Can we modify the environment to meet our needs, or does the environment ultimately determine human culture and society? Like always, if you have any questions, ask them in class. I'm happy to help.